I'm excited to introduce Dr. Clay Jones. Dr. Jones was one of my favorite professors at Biola University in the Masters in Christian Apologetics program. He formerly hosted a radio show called Contend for Truth for 8 years, where he frequently debated with leaders of opposing worldviews. Besides being a highly sought-after speaker, he has written 2 books, including the best-selling book, Why Does God Allow Evil? Competing Answers to Life's Toughest Questions, and more recently, Immortal, How the Fear of Death Drives Us and What We Can Do About It. Dr. Jones is clearly not afraid to engage with the most challenging topics in today's culture. He is also chairman of the board of Ratio Christi. He and his lovely wife, Jean, hail from Southern California. Please welcome Dr. Clay Jones as he shares his talk with us entitled Self-Worth, Ministry, and Misery.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Daria. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. Most people, I'm going to tell a different kind of identity story. Most people get their self-worth from their vocations, being a successful business person, being a great wife, a great mother, a great cook, having, successful children. This is where people get their identity on the whole. In fact, my book, Immortal, that Daria mentioned, is largely about how people find their self-worth and identity. And for me, a lot of people then, that get into ministry like I did, they see their self-worth as being a successful pastor or a successful apologist. That's how I'm valuable, because how successful I am. But I've got news for you. That kind of identity, if you leave it just there on my success as being a minister or my success as being an apologist, can be very harmful to people. And it was very, very harmful to me, as I'll tell you in a minute. Because see, as we compare ourselves with others, what happens is that we become jealous of other people's success, or we become arrogant and proud because we're over other people that aren't as good as we are. And so saying that I'm valuable because I'm an apologist, or I'm valuable because I'm some sort of a ministry success, leads to arrogance and jealousy. And most of those, by the way, in Christian ministry, the overwhelming majority, in fact, struggle to get off of that ladder of who's better than who. In fact, one of the big jokes at church conferences, and I've talked to pastors about this, one of the big jokes at church conferences is, the first question when the pastors get together is, how big is your church? That kind of makes sense when you think about it. I mean, that's like, where are you on the ladder? I'm going to tell you now about my struggle. Growing up, my father was an atheist and my mother was an astrologer, not to be confused with what Hugh Ross does, by the way. She was an astrologer. Together we attended the United Methodist Church. And honestly, I was a rebellious, porn-loving, punk of a kid that had a terrible shoplifter, that had a terrible GPA. But then when I was 13 years old, 2 days before I turned 13 at the Billy Graham Crusade, Billy preached on heaven and hell, and I knew I was going to hell because I was a mess. Well, it didn't take long that I got into ministry. I was just gung-ho on it. And I wanted to be a success in ministry. I did want to please the Lord. I want to make that very clear. I wanted to please the Lord, but I also wanted to be a ministry success. In fact, I had a kind of a mantra. I didn't tell people this, but this is what I thought all the time. I thought, I'm going to be the youth minister in a mega church. Then I'm going to be the associate pastor in a mega church. And then I'm going to be the senior pastor of a mega church. And then I'm going to be the senior pastor of a bigger mega church. And I honestly would say that to myself all the time. That was my trajectory. And I emphasize, though, I did want to please the Lord, but I had ministry success as being a lot of my identity, if not most of it. And then when, if it turned out rather young, I think I was only 20 years old, that I was hired to be a high school youth minister in a church that had 10 to 12,000 regular attenders. That wasn't just their membership pool. They had about 10 to 12,000 in attendance. And I went, check. I have now made the first thing. I am now a youth minister in a mega church. Here I go. The CE director, the Christian education director, however, didn't see the glory that was in me. And that was really hard on me. And then he liked another youth pastor better than he liked me. And that was honestly just horrifying to me. And I became bitter and resentful at this other youth minister. And I can't tell you, my sexual lusts were out of control. Porn was a problem. Thankfully, I didn't commit adultery, but just lust is lust, by the way. And that's the thing that a lot of people don't realize. In James chapter 3, verse 16, it says, "For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there you'll find disorder and every vile practice." You see, because lust is lust. And I don't think people realize that. See, if you're lusting after ministry success, you're going to just be lusting after all kinds of stuff. Like I say, one more time, I did want to please the Lord, though. Well, here, in fact, the college pastor walked by one day and he looks at me as he's walking up the stairs to the church offices and he says, "You're just trying to build your own little kingdom." Now, I could have said a lot of things. I could have told him he got me wrong, that I was really trying to please the Lord. That wouldn't have been true. I could have told him, "You're right. I'm working on it, though. I'm trying not to be that way," but that wouldn't have been true either. Instead, I said something very spiritual. I looked at him. I said, "So are you." And he walked off, and that was the end of it. But then I got tired, and I started feeling exhausted. In fact, I would get up, have breakfast, and take a nap. Then I'd have lunch, and I'd take a nap. Then I'd have dinner, and I'd take a nap, and then I'd go to bed, and something's wrong with me. And I knew something's really wrong with me because I just couldn't stay awake. So I looked it up, and I looked up increased exhaustion. And the first thing I found was leukemia. And I was like, "Oh no, I've got leukemia." Anyway, I went to the doctors. He says, "No, you have hypoglycemia." And this was because I was just such a mess. Anyway, so one day here I am, and he said, "I've got to exercise. You've got to exercise. You've got to exercise a lot to get your, to deal with this." So here I am, start running a lot, running long distances to try to deal with this. Anyway, one day I'm playing Marco Polo with some high school kids in the high school youth group, and I'm swimming, and all of a sudden, my left shoulder, I feel a twang, and two thoughts occur in my mind simultaneously. The two thoughts were, I've just dislocated my shoulder. And I mean, at the same moment that I was thinking that, I thought, do not be like a mule without understanding. And here I was, a mess. I was a bitter, jealous, lustful, ministry mediocre that couldn't stay awake, but now I couldn't even exercise. I was broken, and I knew God was getting my attention, that he was trying to say, "Stop it." Anyway, I had to really sit down and do a self-assessment and go, where did I go wrong? And I decided I cannot build my identity on my ministry success. And I never again repeated the mantra, I'm going to be the youth minister to megachurch, and then the associate pastor of a megachurch, and then the pastor of a megachurch. Anyway, not long after that, by the way, I became an associate pastor of a church with about 5,000 in attendance, but this time I didn't say check. During that time, I began to study the glory that awaits us in heaven forever. And that was no less than life-changing. It freed me. It freed me largely from many of the lusts, especially sexual lusts that I was dealing with. And I'm going to tell you something. There's something I know about all of you, that I know about everybody that's watching this. You're all full of lust. Every single one of you are full of lust. And you're thinking, whoa, that's kind of a weird statement to make, but I'm standing by it. You're all full of lust. And you're going to lust after God and his kingdom, or you're going to lust after people, possessions, positions, or pleasures, but you are going to lust because God created us as beings that have strong desires. And so you're going to lust after God and his kingdom, or you're going to lust after people, possessions, positions, or pleasures, but you are going to lust. Now, I'm not perfect at this, to say the least. I still get caught up in what people think of me. But striving to lust after God and his kingdom has changed my identity, that I want to please the Lord, and what he thinks of me is the most important. And, by the way, after I left that church of 5,000, I thought I'd start a church. It never became more than a Bible study. For about 8 years, I taught 10 people. Do not be afraid of obscurity. The Lord likes us just having to do the job. I taught 10 people for about 8 years. Anyway, let me ask you a question, and I think this will be very freeing to some of you if you really take this in. who's going to be greater in the kingdom of God? Who's your favorite apologist, or who's your favorite minister? Who's going to be greatest, in your opinion, in the kingdom of God? But, I'll tell you something. Is it going to be one of them, or is it going to be the gal who's not that pretty, who didn't go to college, who works in a convalescent home, and all day long, every day, she takes care of the people that are in her charge. Every day she takes care of them, and she shares Jesus with them as she has the opportunity. Who's going to be greatest in the kingdom of God between those two? I know the answer. There's only one possible answer. And you might be kind of surprised at that. And the answer is, I don't know. We don't know who's going to be greatest in the kingdom of God. But I know one thing is for sure. It's not necessarily who you think is the greatest minister. In fact, 2 years ago, I'll bet some of you would have thought Ravi Zacharias is going to be the greatest in the kingdom of God because or at least one of the greatest, because he's one of the greatest Christian ministers in the world, greatest apologist. He's not going to do better than the convalescent home woman, is he really, when heaven comes and the judgment comes? Another reason we don't know who's going to be greatest in the kingdom of heaven is that Jesus said those who've been given much let me start over. Jesus said of those who've been given much, that much would be required. I became a Christian very young, and I have friends that didn't become a Christian until midlife. Well, obviously I had a head start, becoming a Christian at almost 13 years old. And the Lord has allowed me to have certain things. And I'm a teacher, and James warns us that those who teach will be judged with greater strictness. And so people who have been given a lot, where you might say ministerially, wow, they're really up there in being successful and useful ministers for God's kingdom, we're going to be judged more strictly. And honestly, that kind of scares me, because I know I'm going to be judged more strictly because of the things that God has given me. So here's a passage. If I was going to say a passage that sums up my identity more than any other, is 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 1-5. And it says this: so then, men ought to regard us as servants of Christ, as those entrusted with the secret things of God. Now it is required that those who've been given a trust must prove faithful. Then Paul says, I care very little if I'm judged by you or any human court. I want you to think about that just a second. I care very little. He doesn't say, I don't care at all if I'm judged by you. Paul would like it if people appreciated and approved of his ministry, but he says, I care very little if I'm judged by you or any human court. He says, indeed, I don't even judge myself. My conscience is clear, but that does not make me innocent. It is the Lord who judges me. So Paul then says, so therefore judge nothing before the appointed time. Do not judge who's the greatest, anything. Stop it. Judge nothing before the appointed time. Wait until the Lord comes. He will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and expose the motives of men's hearts. And at that time, each will receive his praise from God. Notice that our motives are going to be exposed for what we did for his kingdom. Did we do it for ourselves, or did we do it in loving sacrifice for his kingdom? Which was it? And he, because of course, remember, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13, I can speak with the tongue of, if I speak with the tongues of men and angels and have not love, he says, I'm just a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. We can't use that as the judge. You see, we're not on a ladder. If I would thought I was on a ladder and I went, I don't know, Hugh Ross is way up there, and then down lower than him is William Lane Craig, and then somewhere under him, I'm going to start giving more names. And then I'm way down here. That would drive me crazy. And also, like I said, leads to arrogance, because they go, well, I'm better than all the people below me. Bad. Stop it. I'm not on a ladder. You're not on a ladder. Learning to focus solely to please Jesus is very freeing, and knowing that we're going to be judged based on what he gave us, not how far we got in comparison to other ministers. Frankly, I can tell you a lot of apologists are a lot smarter than I am. God has given them a greater IQ. He was certainly among them than he's given me, but I'm not going to be judged by that. Neither are you. It's all about our hearts. And so I encourage you, get off the ladder of ministry and sit there and say, how am I going to please Jesus? Because that's the real question. That's the question of the ages. Work hard, work very hard at pleasing Jesus, and do not worry about how successful other people are going to be, because as I pointed out, You do not know what their hearts are really going to be like. You may think that they're great, but they're really not. And in the Lord's mind, it could just be the gal who's working as a convalescent home in a convalescent home and lovingly taking care of those in her charge. If you take this in and you make this where I am a servant of Christ, as Paul says, entrusted with the secret things of God, and it's required that I must prove faithful over what he's given me, and that he's going to judge my heart at the end, it's very freeing because I'm not trying to compete with other people on the ministry ladder. Do this, I guarantee you, and you'll have a lot more joy in your life, and you'll be a lot less anxious. One well-known apologist, who I'm not going to mention his name for obvious reasons, as you'll hear in a second, said, if I could do that, I'd be a lot less depressed. Well, work on it. Strive to not put yourself on a ladder with other people. There's only one person that's going to judge me that matters, and he's the creator of the universe. Anyway, it's been a pleasure to talk to you.